Good afternoon. Today is Friday, the 16th of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Debi Evans and with Mark Anderson, who will be speaking via his live link from the United States. Well, we're going to kick straight off with the subject of Ukraine because events there are immensely important. Obviously, everything that's taking place in Ukraine and the war has huge ramifications for not only everybody in Europe, but also US and to some extent worldwide. And of course, the Western media getting very, very excited by the Ukrainian incursion over the northern border into Kursk territory. Now, the first thing to say to people, we'll come on to the Kiev Post in just a second, but before we get to that, the important thing to say is that the region that the Ukrainians have gone into is largely open space, woodlands. It has a very, very small and well dispersed Russian population. And so essentially the Ukrainian forces have gone into an area where they're operating largely in small groups and dispersed amongst this very wide open space and forested area. So to some extent, this makes the Russian operation very difficult because although the Ukrainian troops are using mechanized equipment, the region itself suits relatively small groups hiding in these wooded areas. Nevertheless, what we're actually seeing on the ground is the Russians are now forming a comprehensive defense and the Ukrainians have been taking particularly heavy losses. But the key point is propaganda from the Ukrainian side. I'm just going to bring on the Kiev Post here. This is not to criticize them directly, but to say that even in this article, it's very difficult to actually pick up what's happening. They say 5 things worth knowing about Ukraine's Kursk offensive in Russia. If you look at the article itself, that's Russia reinforces the defensive position, drone swarms, Kursk 2024, and a lot of things that you didn't know about, which is talking about counter-terrorism in Chechnya. So there's not a lot of factual information in this thing. If I just bring in the next bit of text here, this is where the propaganda starts. Moscow is ransacking other frontline sectors for troops. This is totally untrue. The Russians have about 850,000 troops mobilized. They have an abundance of troops, and the troops that are being used to quell the incursion into the Kursk area, these are troops completely separate from the fighting in the Donbass region. To the contrary, it is Ukraine that is having to pull troops off the front line. And at the moment, what is happening is that the Russian forces are moving forward in many areas. This is simply not being discussed in the West. Let's have a look at the BBC getting very excited because the Ukrainians are stating that they've been using Challenger tanks in the Kursk incursion.
Challenger 2 tanks supplied by the UK to Ukrainian forces have been used in their cross-border incursion into Russia, a source has told the BBC. Kyiv says it's expanding its military operation in the Kursk region, and within the past hour or so, a top commander has said the country's troops advanced a further 1.5 kilometres in the past day. But Russia insists they are pushing back. Our correspondent Will Vernon has the latest.
In Russia, evacuations from parts of the border regions continue. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. The Russian military is desperately trying to stop the Ukrainian advance, releasing more pictures allegedly of strikes against Ukrainian forces.
So there's a lot of nuances in that clip. Of course, there's the excitement that the British Challenger tank is apparently being used in the battle. This was one of the wonder weapons that was supposedly going to change the war for Ukraine, alongside American equipment such as the Abrams tank. And the latest Western wonder weapon is the F-16 fighter, which is not going to arrive in sufficient numbers to change much on the battlefield. But he's also talking about alleged Russian attacks. Now, if there's one thing about the information that is coming out of the Russian Ministry of Defense, and is also coming across many excellent social media analyst sites, is the use of Russian weapons to destroy heavy armor. This is a video of a destruction of a British Challenger tank. Let's let this video run, and you can see what is about to happen. So the first thing we're seeing is the power of the drones in surveillance and spotting armor, but also men operating. And there is no doubt that the Russians have far more drones and better capabilities. So the Ukrainians in this sector are really suffering from the attacks that are coming in from Russian drones. And if we have a look just very shortly in this clip, you will see the effect of one of the Russian drone strikes on this Challenger tank there that has gone into the woods to hide. There are many reports appearing that the Challenger tank is not faring well on the battlefield against modern weapons that the Russians are using, and has a propensity to explode and burn. So this is just one of the videos that the BBC is trying to call alleged attacks. The reality is that the Ukrainians are now really beginning to suffer from these attacks, and the number of Ukrainian troops being killed is climbing. The Ukrainians, we also need to say, are reinforcing the area. And this, many commentators are saying, is a disastrous action, because essentially they are going to be contained in the initial incursion area, and the Russians are then going to destroy these troops and their equipment bit by bit, as they are doing on the other areas of the front. The difference, I'll stress it again, is that the Ukrainians have pulled highly experienced, some of their best troops, off the Donbass fronts in order to take this, make this attack into Russia. What's the objective? It appears to hold territory up until the US elections, when the Ukrainians can use this as a bargaining chip for more money and weapons, and to show that the Western masters, that they're still capable of an attack on the Russians. So many military people are saying this is a very cynical attack, because it's a publicity stunt which is going to cost many lives. Now, I just want to come on to the subject of losses of Western and, we will say, possibly even UK servicemen and women inside Ukraine. There's been at least 4 major Russian attacks where the Russians have claimed that they have hit NATO personnel in Ukraine. This is a freedom of information sent to the Ministry of Defence in UK, 15th of August, saying, please advise how many British service personnel have died while carrying out duties in Ukraine since May 2022 to the date of this request. Please advise how many British service personnel have been injured while carrying out duties. Now, this is a very important question. Of course, the response here from the Ministry of Defence goes on to come up with all the usual statements. So they estimate they will take an additional 20 working days to make a final decision on where the balance of public interest lies. That doesn't mean to say they're considering what's best for the public. It means they're considering what is safest for the government. But the response goes on with a normal disclaimer. But I couldn't help but notice that there is no signature. So this is effectively an anonymous response from the Ministry of Defence. We will wait and see whether they declare who has been killed or injured and what the numbers are. Now, I just wanted to bring people's attention on to this. This is something that I've been thinking about it over a couple of days, but this is the definition of murder. This is taken from the CPS website. So in a case of murder, you've got to be of sound mind. You've got to kill somebody unlawfully, and that is any reasonable creature. That could be a human being. And it is going to take place under the King's peace, so it's not in wartime. And there's got to be an intent to kill. So effectively, this is the basic definition. We can also have a look at this. This is conspiring or soliciting to commit murder. Whosoever shall solicit, encourage, pursue, or endeavour to pursue, or shall propose to any person to murder any other person. Now, what I want to do is just get the audience thinking about this in relation to the conflict in Ukraine. And of course, if we put operations in the middle, we've effectively got a UK cabinet war against Russia. It's a proxy war being fought via Ukraine. So UK has not been attacked by Russia nor suffered any act of war. UK is not at war with Russia. And the UK has solicited, encouraged, persuaded, and endeavoured to persuade Ukraine and individuals in Ukraine to murder Russian civilians and military on behalf of the UK government. Russians are not subjects of His Majesty, nor are they within the King's dominions. So what I'm showing here is that we're not at war with Russia, and yet we are directly responsible for the killing of people. We, being the Cabinet Office in this country, should they be held accountable? And if we just bring this in, we can also now ask a question. If British Special Forces and servicemen are being killed in Ukraine under these circumstances, have they been unlawfully killed at the hand of the UK government? I'll leave our audience to consider this, but I'll just bring in reports that Charles Mallet made a couple of days ago, because here we've got the British government scrutinising people in this country, Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage mentioned here, being scrutinised by the security services amid fears that Britain's far-right riots are being fuelled by the Putin regime. And we've also got the fact that specialist officers have been tasked with pursuing online offenders and so-called influencers responsible for spreading hate and inciting violence. This is while the killing goes on in Ukraine at the hand of the UK government and the Cabinet Office in particular. And Charles Mallet also highlighted here that there was additional parts that we needed to encourage, capable of encourage or assistance, intends to encourage or assistance commission of a serious crime. These can be directly applied, I believe, to what's happening in Ukraine. So at that point, we'll move on, but events in Ukraine clearly targeting the American election. So Mark, let's bring you into the UK column news today. Tell us about what's been happening around Kamala Harris.
Well, this is tying in, Brian. Good day to everyone. This ties into media deception of one species or one context or another. Kamala coronated. This is from the most recent edition, the print edition of American Free Press. Mainstream media goes all in to get Harris elected. And we'll move on from there, and I'll explain in a more wide manner. This is very reminiscent. The Time magazine coronating Kamala Harris is from the 26th of August, 2024. But remember, back on the 23rd of October in 2006, Time magazine also coronated Barack Obama, who was an obscure Illinois state senator before he became a U.S. senator, and made his way up the ladder, and voila, he was our first Black president, even though technically he was mulatto. And the same thing with Kamala racially. I'll briefly comment on that. She is at best half Black, but probably less than that. And we'll get into that more in another broadcast. But of course, the media makes a lot of that and her gender. to pump this up. But a little bit of details from this front page AFP piece. The first couple paragraphs pretty much explain it. And then the last one, on August 12th, Time magazine published an artist's stylized rendering of Vice President Kamala Harris, drawing her to look up to the heavens, despite the fact that Harris refused a sit-down interview with the iconic magazine. The editors and publishers still made the decision to celebrate and praise the far-left politician. And then I could probably add a little more. Ever since a palace coup at the Democratic Party replaced the elderly, cognitively impaired Joe Biden with Harris, the vice president has refused to sit down for an interview, instead choosing to travel around the country to deliver the exact same speech straight off of a teleprompter. Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, we'll talk about him in a few minutes, have yet to publish anything that lays out where they will stand on the most important issues of the day, including immigration, the economy, and war. But the media still keeps fawning over them. And I'll jump to this next part toward the end. That article mentions this lady. You can go on. The article mentions this lady, Sarah Fisher of Axios. And as AFP indicated, and then I went to the Axios publication online to confirm this, the Harris campaign has been editing news headlines and descriptions within Google search ads that make it appear as if The Guardian, Reuters, CBS News, and other major publishers are on Kamala's side. So there's some direct manipulation going on here. It's not just bias. And we'll continue from there. This is a little more detail from Axios. The Harris campaign has been editing news headlines and descriptions within Google search ads, as I noted, that make it appear as if The Guardian, Reuters, CBS, and other major publishers are on her side. Axios has found why it matters. It's a common practice in the commercial advertising world that doesn't violate Google's policies, but the ads mimic real news results from search closely enough that they have news outlets caught off guard. According to Google's Ad Transparency Center, the Trump campaign isn't running these types of ads, but this technique has been used by campaigns before. The ads say that they are sponsored, but it's not immediately clear that the text that accompanies real news links is written by the campaigns and not by the media publication itself. So this is a rather unusual thing. These are some actual screenshots that Axios did of the merger between advertising and news that we're talking about, where the Harris campaign apparently is manipulating the headlines. VP Harris's economic vision, lower costs and higher wages. Tim Walz's military service. He's of course, the governor of Minnesota and the VP pick, 24 years in the National Guard. The next slide is a couple more examples of these. One has to do with inflation is down under the Biden-Harris administration. The U.S. is winning the inflation fight. So again, the question is, did the the Harris-Walz campaign actually alter those sub-headlines or the main headlines? And apparently, to some fairly significant extent, they have done so. Since August 3rd, nearly a dozen news companies have been used in these types of ads from the Harris campaign. Nearly a dozen news companies. Examples include the independent UK, National Public Radio, Associated Press, The Guardian, USA Today, Public Television, PBS in the US, CNN, CBS News, and Time Magazine, and others, even a North Dakota radio station. These ads include links to real articles from the news outlets, but the headlines and supporting text have been altered to read as though the articles support the Harris campaign's objectives. And that's probably a sufficient read on that, Brian. But it definitely suggests that the media is going all out, even beyond what they did for Obama, which was very significant in order to get the Harris-Walz ticket absolute top billing here. Now, this item here, Brian, is from the Minnesota governor's office itself. We can talk just a little bit in a couple of minutes that I have left here about Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, her VP partner. And back in 2022, now take note of that. The pandemic as we knew it was just about 2 years old. So there was some knowledge that the shots, the injections posed some danger to the public. It wasn't like this was January or March 2020. This was January of 22. Governor Walz launches Kids Deserve a Shot vaccine incentive program for Minnesotans 5 to 11 years old. $200 Visa gift cards to all Minnesota families who get their kids 5 to 11 years old fully vaccinated in January and February of 2022. And it notes here, today, Governor Walz announced the launch of the new phase of the Kids Deserve a Shot vaccine incentive program, the next phase, to encourage Minnesota families to get their kids 5 to 11 years old fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The Walz-Flanagan administration is committed to providing these resources to keep kids healthy. While Minnesota is one of the leaders in the nation in vaccinating children 5 to 11 years old, this is still the lowest rate of vaccination among eligible groups in the state. And go on from there. There's one other item, I believe, that stems from this press release. As Omicron surges across our nation, we're continuing to use every resource we have to keep our families safe and healthy, Governor Walz said. There's a lot of highly transmissible virus circulating in our communities. By getting our children 5 to 11 years old vaccinated gives them critical protection against severe illness and hospitalization. You'll get $200 cash in your pocket for getting this easy vaccination. There was also an additional incentive that was involved in this. There's no better way to keep your family safe than by getting everyone who's eligible vaccinated, the lieutenant governor was quoted as saying. We want to help Minnesotans start the year off by getting these vaccinations done. And it goes on to say toward the end there that Minnesotans 5 to 11 must receive their first and second dose between January 1st and February 28th of that year, 2022, in order to be eligible. And so a lot of critics of Governor Walz, Kamala Harris's running partner, Brian, have accused him of outright bribery back then to push the vaccination regime. And Governor Pawlenty, the former governor of Minnesota up until 2011, he said that Walz is the most liberal socialist governor in all of the United States. Radically socialist, in fact. So that's sort of a overview of the candidacy and the media going out of its way at the exclusion of all else to push the candidacy of Harris and Walz. So back to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Well, what's happening there in the States with psychological manipulation of the public, because this is what it's about, that's also taking place in UK, and we're going to see that in coming to light in a number of the subsequent sections that we've got in today's news. So, Debi, welcome you to the news today, and you're going to take us into the subject of organ harvesting.
I am. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you. And yeah, this is a massive subject, and I have been asked by a number of people, please, could I cover organ donation and transplantation? But I'm fear that it raises more questions than we're probably going to answer. And I'm hoping at least today we can start the conversation. So let's go back to remember between 1988 and 1995. Many of you will remember Alder Hey. Forgotten for 25 years. The article is entitled, obviously it's a lot older than that now, how the 1,000 infant bodies were found after Alder Hey, where organs were removed after post-mortems and were left in laboratory storerooms. And as a result, the Royal Liverpool Children's Inquiry report, massive report, if you haven't read it, it's quite harrowing. But as a result of Alder Hey, we have another regulator. I found another regulator, which is another whole new segment of its own, but it's called the Human Tissue Authority, and it was set up as a result of Alder Hey as the regulator. But what does it actually do? What do they regulate? So in the next slide, you'll see that it's a number of things. They cover a number of acts: the Human Tissue Act, the Human Tissue Quality and Safety for Human Application Regulations. It covers all sorts, but you're looking at anatomy, which is teaching aids for medical students, bone marrow stem cell donation, organ donation, organs after death, post-mortem, public display and research. Like I say, it's a whole new subject of its own. But I want to focus on organ donation today because currently on the waiting list, there are 7,000 waiting for organs. So a little video to introduce you. Will you do it today? Have a look at this.
I did it waiting for the bus.
We did it together.
I saw them.
We did it together, as a team.
2 minutes now could save up to 9 lives. Confirm your decision to be an organ donor. It's the best thing you'll do today. Visit organdonation.nhs.uk.
And trust me, we're going to go and visit them in a minute. But I just want to show you that on the column website, we've done an awful lot of work on organ donation. This is just a few examples. So if you go to the search bar on the UK column website and put in organ donation, organ transplantation, lots more will come up. But this afternoon, I just want to focus on William. At the story of William. William is 11 weeks old and he is in need of a heart. He's our youngest patient who is relying on another family to agree to donate their child's heart, because you have to remember that little people need little organs. Currently, there are about 250 children waiting on the organ donation list, and apparently 38 of those are needing hearts. So here's another little video, Waiting to Live.
There's not much I can do. I long to live like you. I'll wait here patiently for a lifeline. We give it to me, and I wonder if I will see another sunrise. We give it to me.
So you see, the pressure is on for parents to donate organs. And the Behavioural Insights team have been very busy working with the DVLA, the NHS Blood and Transplant Service, the Department of Health and Government Digital Services to design a different messaging to encourage us all to donate. And these little tiny changes have actually led to 96,000 extra people need or wanting to or saying that they're opting in to donate. So how have they been doing this? Well, they've been using randomized controlled trials in conjunction with, you can see there, the Cabinet Office, Department of Health, Government Digital Services and DVLA. And another shot you'll see of the test that they're using, which is called Test, Learn and Adapt, which is applying behavioural insights to organ donation. I think there's another slide, next one, for Test, Learn and Adapt. Is it that there it is? And you can see the people involved in that. And I've just highlighted Dr. David Halpin because doesn't his name always crop up everywhere? But what does this actually mean? You know, Brian and all of the team, we've talked about the nudge technique, but what's sludge? Because sludge is the opposite of nudge and it makes a process much more difficult. It's to create friction deliberately. So, for example, if you sign up to a 30-day free trial, you give your card details and they tell you that after 30 days, if you don't want it anymore, it's up to you to cancel the service. And similarly, nation. So if we look in Max and Kira's bill, which was passed from 2020, we can see that we've gone from an opt-in scheme to an opt-out. So what do they ask you to do? They ask you to register your decision online. Now, I have to say to everyone, I registered opting out years ago and I even got a letter. However, that doesn't apply anymore. And it would seem that anybody that has a letter, you have been probably opted back in. So if we go back to the red and green slide there, with how to opt in and how to opt out. So register your decision. Please opt out online. It doesn't seem to count any other way, and it is quite a simple procedure. In any event, there is a phone number that you can phone, and the phone number's here, 0300 123 2323. So then I went to look at transplant units in the UK, and there are quite a lot of transplant units, and I wanted to see how many transplants were going on in each unit. And on the next slide, you'll see that in the year between April 23 and May 24, 4,657 transplants had taken place, with 462 of those in Birmingham. But what is the UK's vision? Because clearly the UK have a vision. And here it is, Organ Donation and Transplantation 2030, Meeting the Need, which is a 10-year vision. And this covers all nations. When I went to look at the forward, it indicated that deceased organ donation had risen by 56%. And you'll see there that I've just arrowed Matt Hancock's name, which I'm sure will give you much confidence. But anyway, going further on into the document, the ambition is that the UK becomes a world-leading service, working with international colleagues to increase donors and transplants. Now, working with international colleagues, does that mean organ donations that are given in this country will stay in this country, or are they being shipped out? I'm not quite sure on that. But if one of your loved ones does donate organs, they'll be given, after their death, the St. John's Award. And you will be given the award to increase visibility. And it's a gift from the government to say thank you very much. But if you're a living donor, so you're maybe wanting to give a kidney, or maybe one of your relatives needs a kidney, you're going to get awarded a living donation pin. And they're going to be looking too at transplant as the early option. So this is explore it at an early stage. So you can see where we're going with this. And the word sustainable, it doesn't take long to see the word sustainable for sustainable goals. And here we go, a sustainable, responsive UK service. We're going to maximise transplant opportunities in the UK. And just repeat that, maximised. And right at the top, it says living donation will become an expected part of care, where clinically appropriate for all in society. So I'm quite concerned about the wordage on that. But what is organ donation? So I went to look at the organ donation site, and they say that most organs come from those who have died. But my question to that is, have they? And how important is this decision right now to all of us? So I just want to highlight what the websites say. And they say you really do need to make a decision. And I would suggest everybody does make an informed decision. And they say you must register your decision. So if you want to opt out, you must register it. And please inform your family. But I also want to make it clear on the next slide as well. If you decide not to opt out, it will be presumed that you are opted in. So it will be presumed. Organ donation law varies across all nations, literally. So I've just got, there's a phone number here. If anybody wants more information on the law and the opt-out, there's another phone number, 0300 303 2094. But what is deemed consent? On the next slide, it talks about consent. And if you have not opted out, you will have deemed to have given consent, authorization, and your consent will be presumed to be an organ donor. And there's a little tiny short video here on the law surrounding organ donation.
At the end of a rainbow, you'll find a pot of gold.
The law around organ donation in England has changed to an opt-out system to allow more people to save more lives. But you still have a choice. Whatever you decide, it's important to tell your family and friends to give them the certainty to support your decision at a difficult time. Visit organdonation.nhs.uk to find out more.
So as I say, there's a lot to this subject, but I just want to highlight a couple of other stories. So the BBC ran this story, organ harvesting, trafficked for his kidney and now forced into hiding. This is Daniel, who was sent from Nigeria and who ended up at the Royal Free Hospital, my own training hospital, for a life-changing opportunity, only to find out that he'd been sent over to give a kidney. So trafficking, that this was the first prosecution back in 2023. So this is fact. Also, Trenton McKinley is 13 and he suffered brain injuries after a tragic freak utility accident. But as soon as his parents had signed the forms for him to give his organs, he woke up. So I just wanted to highlight those couple of details because Professor Patrick Pulicino has said you cannot diagnose death. So I went to look at the Code of Practice for the Procedure for Diagnosis and Confirmation of Brainstem Function. This is a massive document, and probably for another news, we'll go into it in more detail. But basically, you need 2 doctors with more than 5 years' experience. One has to be a consultant. They need to work together. Some of the tests that they do are on the following slide, and you can see the coma pathway as well. I think yes, that's the one. If you just click on, there's the coma pathway. As I say, it's a massive subject, but I want to highlight this trial that is going on because the body is kept in a very good condition prior to donation. So it's treated like a surgical procedure. People that are giving organs such as heart, lungs, are left in intensive care and they're looked after very well. This is Professor John Dark from Newcastle. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he started the world's largest ever randomized controlled trial into organ donation in dead patients. So these are patients that have already been proclaimed dead, and he has now decided that he wants to start a clinical trial to give these patients, prior to their organs being harvested, a statin called Simvastatin. This has been funded for £1.3 million. They're trying to enroll 2,600 in inverted commas dead patients, because what does it mean to be dead is my big question. And there's a little video here, very, very short video of what happens after you die.
If you're registered to be an organ or tissue donor after death, here's how the process works. When the time for donation comes, the donor is moved from the critical care unit to the operating theater. So it would be very similar to somebody undergoing an operation in terms of the way that we approach it, the professionalism in the operating room. We have anesthesia, we have the donor surgical teams. At the end of the process, the machines that have kept the heart and the lungs going are stopped so that we can then remove the organs. All the incisions are closed with great care, the same way that we would for someone who's having an elective operation, so that they're cosmetically that things look fine. Then they go to the morgue and then are released to the families within a relatively timely fashion, because people obviously have preparations for funerals. For bereaved families, it's a real silver lining in the context that can otherwise be quite difficult, that the last act of their loved one was to save the life of several other people. So I would say anybody, number one, who's willing to be an organ donor should sign up to be an organ donor.
They don't take organs from dead people, but also the WEF are looking at using pig hearts. It's medical first. They've all failed so far. It's called xenotransplantation. And there's the next slide, just to tie this segment up, is the ethics and welfare of animals with regards to xenotransplantation. And if all else fails, I guess 3D printing. We might be relying on 3D printing. But my concerns are really, is this going to put more pressure on families? The more the public give, the more they seem to want. And will we be encouraging euthanasia or assisted dying to take place in an operating theatre? Much to talk about.
Debi, thank you very much for that. A lot to talk about. We'll talk about some of it in extra time after today's news. This subject is so important. Well, let's just talk to our audience and say thank you very much for all the support you've given us, and to say that the people who are subscribing to us on a monthly basis, it's your financial support that keeps us going, and we hope very much to be expanding in the future. So we are here because of you. You are a key part of our team, and we hope very much to be doing more in the future as a result of your support. Please share the information we're putting out. This is why we give our broadcasts. Facebook still not playing, but we're still working to see whether we can convince them to play. And if you want to contribute in a different way, then you might consider buying something from the UK Column shop. We are also encouraging people to buy the Agenda 21 Your Life in Their Hands booklet. We've had such a good response from people that we are very confident in saying, if you haven't already got a copy, please do buy one. And we're also going to put out special comment on the interview with Alastair Williams, and this has gone down extremely well with the UK Column audience. Laughter in an Ugly World. Charles Mallet doing a really good interview here. If you haven't seen it, get onto the UK Column website and have a look. And also we're going to say, if you haven't got a ticket yet for the UK Column on Location event in Bristol, 19th of October, please get one. This is going to be our opportunity to mix and meet you. And it's going to be a wonderful event. We will be announcing more information about speakers very shortly. And it's going to be a tremendous day. So do come and join us. Now, I want to move on to the subject of New Zealand. A little while ago, we had a lady that came to visit us from New Zealand. We had a fascinating discussion about what happened in New Zealand over the whole of the lockdown period, but it's raised all sorts of interesting topics. Let's just first have a look at this little clip with NHS England. Listen for the use of the applied psychology, but also right at the end, New Zealand gets a little mention.
When I look at the vaccine delivery, you sent 1 million letters to quite a wide population, but there were in fact only a total of 361,000 MMR vaccines delivered, which suggests that it may not be a very successful program. That's not necessarily the fault of the program. It's just that actually it may be that people are quite resistant, sadly, to getting vaccination against, again, another nasty set of infections, which have, where the vaccine has transformed a lot of lives of people who would otherwise, congenital rubella, for example, virtually gone, measles, a killer, mumps, or orchitis.
So there are going to be 2 more coming at you. Is that all right to batch in? That will be a batch of 5, Steve. So Tanuj and then Robert.
Very quick, Alan. I thought it was a great paper. Tanuj, Associate Ned. Great paper. I actually was going to speak about lessons learned from communications in the past, and that's been covered. I want to shift the same kind of thread to education in the community, right? I mean, even with all of the stuff that's done, we often meet people with serious concerns about vaccination, and comms is one end of it, but it's sort of education with the community. And how are you thinking about it, partnerships in that space, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. Thank you.
And then lastly, Robert.
Yeah, so I think it's a terrific programme, and obviously we've learnt a huge amount through the COVID experience and vaccine hesitancy and all that. 2 questions. One is so others have asked about sort of confidence and nervousness. I'm more interested in the complacency, which I think there probably is a lot of, and particularly around COVID. So what's the messaging to address complacency? I mean, you don't want to scare people. On the other hand, you want to make people aware of the risk. Is that media, or how are you doing that? The second question is just what's your ambition in terms of vaccination rates in the over 65s, for example? I mean, do you have a target in mind?
So there, you've got 5 comments or questions, and you can probably answer some of them as sort of I'll wrap them thematically. But I'll throw one specific, which Steve might know. Either of the Steves, do we know what currently the flu is going through Asia, Australia, Asia? So have we got any information about what might be coming our way?
I don't actually.
I haven't looked at that recently. Helen, you are going to New Zealand?
It was all about the COVID in New Zealand. No, I haven't heard this year. Yes,
Jason. On Monday said it was too early.
Yeah, too early. Okay, fine. All right. Sorry. Thank you. So, Steve.
So what's coming our way? It's all about the COVID in New Zealand. Debi, I'll just bring you on for a very brief comment on that before I make some other comments about what is coming from New Zealand.
Well, yes, New Zealand's a very interesting place. And our interview with Dr. Ursula Edgington, actually, Brave New Zealand, where she was saying that it's a small population in New Zealand. Things are often tested out first on that population first. So if it doesn't work, then it's no big deal. It hasn't cost a lot of money. Those were her words, not mine. And also what happens in the Southern Hemisphere, because it's their winter now, will always follow, or pretty much always follow in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's very much a case of keep your eyes on New Zealand, small population, island nation, and everybody is always looking at the data. And let's not forget Jacinda Ardern and the lock-up policies and the COVID policies were so hard and so stringent back in 2020.
Indeed, they were, and I suggest they're going to be worse in the future. Big thank you to the UK column viewer that sent an email saying to me, have a look at this document. Here it is, the New Zealand Pandemic Plan. And it's a framework for action, 219 pages of amazingly detailed information, but it sets out all of government measures to be taken to prepare for and respond to a pandemic. It updates the New Zealand Influenza Pandemic Plan, a framework for action 2017. My goodness, this document is just incredible because it describes the utter close down and control of society. Here are the contents, which people can freeze and have a look at what's on screen. But this covers every single area of society, and it also includes every single government agency being used for surveillance, for lockdown, for the grouping up of people, for vaccinations. It's truly incredible. And the only way I could really get to the document, if we just pop this one on screen, I won't let it run for long, but I thought the only way I can really show the scale of it is to take a little video of it. And here we see page after page after page scrolling down. This is all plans as how people are going to be informed, corralled, manipulated, injected, locked up. It is about the complete removal of people's rights, and particularly people who dare to challenge what the government says is the necessary action for the pandemic. So I think I'm going to leave that one there, but it's a truly astonishing document. We'll make sure that the link for it is in the show notes. Now, where does that take us? I think that brings you back in, Debbie, on the subject of pox.
Mpox. I'm going to feel a bit like Brenda. Another one. But let's cast our mind back, actually, just quickly before I show you a few slides, because in July 2022, Tedros at the WHO also called this again a public health emergency of international concern, and that one finished in 2023. That's when they were giving smallpox injections. So monkeypox, flu-like symptoms, fever, headache, and then you end up with some lesions and some blisters, and you should avoid all physical contact is what they say. But many people think monkeypox, mpox, monkeys. Actually, the origin of the reservoir is thought to be bats or rats, although it can infect monkeys. So just to clarify that. So if anybody else is looking at mpox with suspicion, I can understand why. So I just want to remind you back to Moderna. I think we've got a slide of Moderna, which cemented a 10-year partnership with the UK for vaccines. And this is relevant because Professor Jonathan Van Tam, you'll remember, is working for them now. So just remember that with Moderna, because on the 9th of August this year, Tedros invited mpox vaccine manufacturers to submit dossiers for emergency evaluation. So to get an emergency use listing, they wanted the manufacturers to apply as soon as possible. And the next slide will show you the invitation that the manufacturers were given with details of how to submit to apply. And then literally 1 week after that, all of a sudden, Tedros at the WHO has announced that it's now mpox is a public health emergency of international concern. And when I went on to look further into the article, it says that they've had 100 lab confirmed cases of clade 1b. Now, we know that yesterday they announced that Sweden had found a case, but hearing the word clade just jogged my memory a little bit. So I went back to 2018 and I remembered this operation or this exercise, Clade X, which was a tabletop pandemic exercise, which was illustrating high-level decisions and policies that the United States and the rest of the world would need to pursue to prevent another pandemic. They did it alongside Dark Winter and Atlantic Storm. How appropriate, but that's probably again for another news segment. So back to monkeypox, you'll be reassured to know that a new monkeypox vaccine has been tested in the UK, of all places, considering this comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So there you see the new monkeypox vaccine being tested. And when you went to look into it, you could see that it was a trial called mPower, where they were looking for healthy volunteers. So I went to look at mPower and found out that mPower is, of course, Moderna. This is all to do with the Moderna UK strategic partnership, which is why the United Kingdom has been picked for this. So when I went to look at the trial itself, it's a randomized control group. You can see all the details there. It's a 13 to 14 month study. Of course, this is going to be mRNA because Moderna are an mRNA company. 9 visits, 3 phone calls, 350 participants, all coming from the UK. And of course, we know that monkeypox or mpox is being targeted towards the gay community because they say that it can be picked up with bodily fluids, sexually transmitted. And I just want to remind people that mRNA, the mRNA injection, appears to wake up latent infections and latent disease. And today we see a rise in gonorrhea, and we also see antimicrobial resistance with that as well. So a lot going on with regards to sexually transmitted disease. And I have to say that a global health emergency would sure disrupt any elections that might be coming up, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Do you want to make a little comment on your blog? We've got a little image here.
Yes, well, actually, have a look at the blog, because if you want to supplement your income, many people are actually signing up to clinical trials to supplement their incomes. And now we're going to be teaching children at a very early age, at the age of 5, how to spot conspiracy theories. And there's a load more in there this week too.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive run through. So on one hand, the governments in UK, the US and governments in Europe are progressing the slaughter in the Middle East and in Ukraine as just 2 examples, but they say to their own publics, you should trust us. Mark, let's bring you back because, of course, lots of manipulation going on around democracy in the States. And you've got a little segment here on the manipulation of elections.
Yes, Brian, a quick comment about Kamala Harris from earlier. All the media going all in for her, despite the fact that she was the first to drop out in the 2016 Democratic presidential primary, the first to drop out in the Democratic presidential primary of 2016, and the polling showing her hitting incredibly high poll numbers is extremely bogus, bordering on fake. And soon I'll have some news on UK Column about the pollsters themselves and their backgrounds. But going into Voter GA, voters organized for trusted election results in Georgia, Garland Favorito, who I've interviewed on the UK Column before, and we can put that interview link in show notes. He came out about 21 days ago, about 3 weeks ago, and addressed the state election board of the state of Georgia. And there's Garland as he is giving the presentation. And this was an extremely pivotal presentation that he gave. And it shows how the news media is completely contradicting the actual sum and substance of that meeting. This quote from Garland spells out the way what he had to say to the state election board at the beginning of his presentation. This is Garland himself, the co-founder of Voter GA. I want to talk to you about the most important case in election board history. This is more allegations than all the other complaints combined since I have been attending election board meetings for 20 years. for 20 years, he emphasized. And viewers may recall on the interview that I did, he really exposes Georgia to be ground zero in proving that the 2020 elections were in fact stolen. Anyway, these are the main 2 points that the election board 3 weeks ago acted on as a direct consequence, Brian, of Garland's presentation. I wrote these myself. Due to Garland's 16-minute presentation about 21 days ago, the Georgia Election Board voted for memory card retention and reconciliation for a 2-year minimum, applying, yes it does, applying to the 2024 presidential election and all the other down ballot races that'll appear on the ballot. This adheres to both state and federal law and pertains to in-person voting. Also, on the second point, also due to Garland, the board voted in favor of a procedure to detect QR code errors that reject ballots and exist within the Dominion computerized vote casting and vote counting system. These are really huge items. A memory card, basically electronically, think of a ballot box full of pieces of paper. A memory card is a digital version of that. So there's much more than meets the eye there. This is very significant. Meanwhile, however, the media is painting a completely different picture of that Georgia State Election Board meeting. The media is trying to say that the State Election Board granted a bunch of new powers to about 159 counties, I believe there is in the state of Georgia. And these new powers will empower each county, the officials in each county, to endlessly second guess the election results and to upend and create chaos throughout the whole process. This is an NBC News item here. Georgia gives local officials new powers to investigate election results. And again, they're trying to say that this is going to just throw the whole system into chaos. But here's what Garland said on that same slide in response to that news item. This is all a facade, blaming Republicans. If Kamala Harris doesn't do well, then GOP or Republican meddling can be blamed. There is nothing new. Georgia law already has given counties plenty of leeway. So the media is exaggerating, if not outright fabricating, what that board meeting was about and avoiding altogether what Garland had to say in his 16-minute presentation and what the board did in response to what Garland Favorito said. So this is just another news clip. I need not really go into it. Georgia gave local officials significant new powers over the certification of election results, a move that could delay or derail future post-election certification processes. That same came out of that same August 7th NBC News report. So it's completely skewing what happened at that meeting and misrepresenting the main thrust of what the board decided, Brian. So as in the Kamala Harris situation and now in this one, the media is completely using misdirection and sometimes outright fabrication on these very pivotal issues because Georgia is ground zero. Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of the state of Georgia, is like the proverbial guy with the finger in the dike, and the waters want to come through. So therefore, Georgia is where this whole thing could blow wide open. And as goes Georgia, so goes the rest of the pivotal states from the 2020 election, where all of this would come out, and how the Secretary of State has managed to control this so far to this degree is really amazing. But Georgia stands at the brink, if Garland is fully successful, of completely coming apart and having to completely admit the myriad evidence of election tampering and theft in that state. And again, that would implicate the other states as well, the pivotal states from that election. So this is a very pivotal issue. We'll keep a very close eye on the state of Georgia to see if the Secretary of State can keep the tidewaters away. It'll be amazing if he can, but we'll see what happens. So back to you, Brian.
Mark, thank you very much for that. And let's remember that the tide waters that you describe are really the truth. It's the truth that's going to come through that hole in the dam. And it's the truth that can do so much for us with so many problems that we face, not only within the Western societies, but across the world. So we'll end the UK column news there. I'd just like to say that as part of our special dedication for our viewers and listeners, Mike has come in from his holiday today in order to help run the studio. Stephanie, unfortunately, unwell, but we keep the show running for you, our UK column viewers, and what a wonderful group of people you are. Thank you very much for joining us today. Big thank you to everybody watching UK column news, wherever you are in the world. Debbie, Mark, thank you for joining me. We will be back for extra time in just a few minutes, so if you're a paid up UK column member, please join us there. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.